I confess, I gave up on the whole exercise Friday night around midnight when the Republican majority in the Senate passed an amendment to its abomination of desolation tax bill that was proposed by that remarkably friendless character, tail gunner Ted Cruz. I like to think that it was Cruz's essential friendlessness that accounted for the fact that they needed Vice President Mike Pence to break the tie on the Cruz Amendment. The amendment would allow families to use money from 529 savings plans to send the kids to private and/or religious schools, or to homeschool their children themselves. Considering that this was in the context of passing a retrograde bill that would wipe out the deduction for state and local taxes, a move that would hit hardest the American families who send their children to public schools, this was too much even for my strong political stomach. The Republicans had the votes to make war on the very idea of the Commons, and they were using them, and, shortly before 2 in the morning, they won, and the Commons lost, and we awoke Saturday morning to a meaner, grubbier country. Advertisement continue reading below. It is still possible that the Republican members of the House of Representatives will don their animal skins, sharpen the bone knives, paint the faces blue, and go screaming off to war when this thing goes to conference, befouling Mitch McConnell's delicate magical math with poo flung from all directions. But, as the Romans learned centuries ago, you should try to bargain with barbarians, and I doubt the Republicans will make that mistake again, not after what happened with their attempts to kill the Affordable Care Act. No, there will be some howling and wailing for show, but the barbarians are not going to save the country. All they'll do is make a greasy operator like Mitch McConnell look reasonable, and make vainglorious senators like Susan Collins and John McCain look more useless. And, besides, with this foul bag of rags they passed on Friday night, the one that eliminates the individual mandate that is the engine behind the Affordable Care Act, they won that battle, too. I think the Senate conferees will agree to some adjustments from their colleagues in the House, all of which will make things worse. However, alas, I don't think the country can count on the Republicans fumbling on the goal line this time around. Advertisement continue reading below. We awoke Saturday morning to a meaner, grubbier country. No, they got what they wanted, and they're going to be quite happy with it. Speaker Paul Ryan, the zombie-eyed granny starver from the state of Wisconsin, knows HES a giant step closer to his lifelong goal of demolishing the social safety net. All he has to do is wait for the inevitable explosion of the deficit, at which point he will screw on his sad basse face and tell us that Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are just things we can't afford anymore. The members of the House will quickly agree that the Senate bill is okay by them and pass it quickly on to a half-mad Republican president who won't understand a word of what HES signing but. So much winning. Advertisement continue reading below. Advertisement continue reading below. By the way, you can feel free to skip any story over the next week that discusses the passage of this sack of cholera in terms of who won and who lost, as though it were a ball game. It is in measuring the scope of what has been wrought on the country here where elite political journalism will continue to fail utterly. In fact, it is important to keep in mind that, all things being equal, this is a bill that would have been proposed and passed even if the tail gunner, or Marco Rubio, or Chris Christie, or John Kasich had been elected president last November. If the president had been impeached by the end of business on Inauguration Day, this bill, and the sad carnival of how it was passed, would have changed a bit. For such a huge and consequential assault on the political commonwealth, the president's fingerprints are remarkably absent from this bill, not because the president is smart, because HES not, but because the Senate Republicans didn't need him. Getty advertisement continue reading below. This was not a Trump bill. This was a Republican bill, a kind of culmination of everything the party has stood for since Ronald Reagan fed it the monkey brains in 1981 and the prion disease began slowly devouring the party's higher functions. It is purely supply-side in its economics, purely retrograde in its attitude toward the political commons, and purely heedless in its concern for anyone except the donor class who keep the party alive. This is why the Republican Party chose to ally itself 50 years ago with the sad detritus of American apartheid. This is why the Republican Party set itself against the expansion of the franchise. This is why the Republican Party set itself against any form of campaign finance reform, and cheered the decision in Citizens United. All of these dynamics were in play long ago, back in the days when Donald Trump was a Democrat. The assault on the idea of a political commonwealth began back then and it really has abated. The only way what happened Friday night could have been avoided is if Hillary Rodham Clinton had been elected in November of 2016, and if the Bernie people have a problem with my saying that, they can go up an alley and holler fish. All of these dynamics were in play long ago, back in the days when Donald Trump was a Democrat. Advertisement continue reading below. Advertisement continue reading below. This is also why so many long-time conservative fetish objects got stuffed into this big barrel of botulism. Lisa Murkowski's price was oil drilling in the Alaskan National Wildlife Refuge. Murkowski at least struck a hard bargain. Collins got bought off with a promise that there will be no Medicare cuts in the future, which there was the comical attempt to slip in an exemption for Christian Hillsdale College, which has rehabilitated its image from the days when its president was accused of having an affair with his son's wife. This failed because it was too ridiculous even for this bill, but I'm fairly sure it will be back. One amendment failed because it was handwritten and nobody could read it. We all really ducked a bullet there, boy. The entire process was shot through with a contempt for democracy and for regular order, which suddenly became less important for McCain than it used to be a few months ago. That's because the bill itself was built on a foundation of contempt for the notion that, in a democracy, we all have a stake in what the government does, and for the notion that we have certain values and principles in common upon which we act. The bill that passed the Senate early Saturday morning has been consistently, wildly unpopular. It passed anyway. When its effects descend on the country, there will be a great outcry about how the government is entirely corrupt and about how it has grown so distant from the people it was designed to serve. Politicians will be blamed irrespective of party. Politics will be blamed irrespective of ideology. Alienation and anger will rise, and, very likely, another demagogue will appear more competent than the present one, and he will ride that alienation and anger into power, and the whole thing will happen all over again. Advertisement continue reading below. The Republicans will have no problem with that either. In fact, they are counting on it. Respond to this post on the Esquire Politics Facebook page.